Crimea is ablaze. Massive fuel depots are exploding. Russian bases have turned into seas of fire, and refugee convoys stretch endlessly across the Kerch Bridge. Night after night, Ukraine delivers chillingly precise counterattacks, decimating the entire logistics lifeline and causing Putin's Crimean fortress to collapse from within. What was once the Kremlin's symbol of power is now nothing but ash and darkness. The inevitable consequence is that Russian citizens are forced to abandon what they considered a vacation paradise and flee back to the mainland. Crimea falls. Putin's fortress of power turns to ash. Crimea is burning. Massive fuel depots are exploding. Military bases are being incinerated, and Russian citizens are starting to flee from the peninsula that the Kremlin once called its precious jewel. In just a few nights, Ukraine has unleashed a series of surgically precise counterattacks, dismantling the entire logistics network of Russian forces, causing the Crimean fortress to collapse from the inside out. What was once Putin's pride now appears as nothing but a blackened strip of ash on satellite imagery. Ukraine's counteroffensive campaign in Crimea is unfolding with astonishing precision. After neutralizing numerous air defense systems, Kyiv shifted its focus to strategic targets: power plants, fuel depots, and critical logistics routes. According to the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, in October alone, Ukrainian airstrikes caused over $5 billion in damage to Russian military installations on the peninsula. The plight of Russian forces has become desperate. Many soldiers, cut off from supplies, are forced to drink rainwater, even their own urine, to survive. Some are dying from hunger and thirst right in the occupied zones. What's more striking is that the people of Crimea aren't blaming Ukraine. They're blaming Putin himself, the one who dragged them into this hopeless war. When 3 major power plants were destroyed, hundreds of thousands of people were plunged into darkness, without water or food. Crimea, once promised by the Kremlin to be Russia's new paradise, is now engulfed in darkness and chaos. On the streets of Simferopol, Sevastopol, and Kerch, long lines of vehicles waiting for fuel stretch for kilometers. Russian authorities have been forced to prioritize fuel for the military, throwing civilian life into chaos. Fuel prices have skyrocketed, while Russian reserves are nearly depleted. Ukraine issued a terse statement: "We have cut the invader's bloodline." With winter approaching, the loss of energy supplies has left the entire Russian military system in the south suffocating. No fuel, no electricity, no transportation. Everything is gradually collapsing. When the military loses control, civilians start fleeing. Ferries from Sevastopol and Kerch are packed to capacity. Videos circulating online show hundreds of cars with Russian license plates lined up on the Crimean Bridge, heading north, leaving behind a land on fire. A former resident of Simferopol recounts, "Hospitals are dark, windows are shattered, water drips from the ceiling. There's no hot water. People have to pay for treatment in terrible conditions. We once believed in the government's promises. Now all that's left is deception." Russia is faltering. Negotiating with Putin means surrender. Negotiation is a word that masks weakness. Peace is an illusion that the fearful cling to avoid facing reality. According to Garry Kasparov, chess grandmaster and Russian political thinker, negotiating with Vladimir Putin is impossible, because he's not fighting for territory, but to maintain power and evade accountability. Anyone who proposes a deal with Putin is essentially legitimizing his crimes. The West often gravitates toward pleasant-sounding phrases: diplomatic solutions, peace roadmaps, peace negotiations. But these concepts become hollow when your opponent is someone who respects no rules, knows no limits, and values human life not at all. Putin doesn't want peace. He wants time, and he'll buy it with lies, only to attack again. Kasparov warns, every call for negotiations with the Kremlin is a knife plunged into the future. A pause only benefits the aggressor. Compromise only strengthens the dictator's power. Every ceasefire without binding mechanisms is merely a respite before the next war. And when you sit at the table with a killer, he doesn't come to talk, he comes to choose his next victim. Compromising with evil is legitimizing evil. Kasparov calls this a bitter but undeniable truth. In Putin's world, war isn't just an action, it's a tool for maintaining power. It transforms internal contradictions into a war against external enemies, painting the image of a national savior. When the other side proposes dialogue, the Kremlin not only gets time to breathe but also receives political recognition. They negotiated with us, which means we're accepted. This is a fatal mistake for those who believe in freedom and the rule of law. Kasparov also harshly criticizes the surrender faction within the West itself, those who preach that we must stop the war to save lives. He responds, "Saving people through surrender is cowardice dressed in humanitarian clothing. Because in politics, morality isn't decoration, it's a life-or-death choice between the price of freedom and the price of submission. And often, the suffering of the weak is more costly than the price of freedom itself." Kasparov doesn't mince words. He states bluntly, the West's problem isn't a lack of resources, but a lack of will. Today's politicians aren't afraid of Ukraine's defeat. They're afraid of victory over Putin, because victory demands action, decisiveness, and responsibility, things that Western bureaucratic politics avoids. Europe and America are mired in a dangerous habit, managing crises instead of solving them. They only do enough not to lose, but don't dare to win. But, as Kasparov says, when your strategy is not to lose, you've already lost. The West is paralyzed by fear of escalation. They fear Putin's reaction more than their own actions. Yet Putin doesn't escalate out of courage. He does so because he smells fear. Every time the West says, "we can't," the red line gets pushed further. We can't provide tanks. They did. We can't send planes. They sent them. Long-range missiles are absolutely out of the question. They're discussing it. Putin understands that behind the word can't is indecisiveness, not principle. Kasparov touches on the core. Dictatorial regimes cannot exist without expansion. When they rot from within, they need an external war to maintain power. Therefore, Putin will never stop on his own. This isn't a mistake, it's the survival mechanism of the regime. Those calling for peace negotiations don't understand that. A deal with Putin will make him stronger, not weaker, because it proves his strategy works. Aggression is effective. Surrender doesn't begin on the battlefield, it begins in thought, Kasparov emphasizes. If not negotiation, then what? The answer, according to him, is clear. Don't stop the war. Strip Putin of his ability to wage war. Don't freeze the conflict. Eliminate the threat at its root. War will not end through diplomacy as long as the dictatorship exists. After Georgia came Ukraine. After Ukraine will be Moldova, then the Baltics. This isn't prediction, it's an inevitable chain of logic. The West is losing not because Putin is strong, but because they lack determination. In war, the victor isn't the one with more weapons, but the one with more will. Kasparov concludes, negotiating with a living aggressor is not peacemaking, it's an act of surrender. The 3-day victory plan becomes 3 years of collapse. Putin must face the truth. When launching the invasion of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin believed Kiev would collapse in 3 days, or at most 3 weeks. But instead of a lightning victory, he received a prolonged nightmare, both on the battlefield and within Russia itself. Since then, the world has witnessed a different Putin, exhausted, paranoid, and haunted by his own power. When power wavers, words no longer matter, only actions reveal the true nature. And over the past 2 years, Putin's actions have exposed a dictator being devoured by the very shadow of power. Mysterious deaths have occurred in succession among Russian oligarchs and high-ranking officials. Some fell from 20th floor windows. Others committed suicide with guns after arguing with Putin. Some were found dead with their entire families in their mansions alongside fake suicide notes. None of this is coincidence anymore. They reflect Putin's greatest obsession, the fear of being overthrown by his own allies. The elite remained loyal because of profit, not belief. When war becomes a quagmire, Putin is no longer a symbol of stability, but becomes the greatest source of risk. In peacetime, that system operated like a mafia empire. Putin distributed privileges. They obeyed for money. But when war causes interests to disintegrate, the balance of power reverses. Now, to keep his throne, he must tighten control through fear and purges. Even his closest associates rarely get to meet Putin. Every appointment goes through multiple layers of security. Food is tested for poison. Belongings are scanned. Biochemical tests are conducted. He uses his own cups, his own cutlery, even has his own testing team just to ensure safety. Putin is obsessed with the risk of being poisoned, but that fear doesn't just come from external enemies. He knows well that the most dangerous person is always inside the house, the very hands that once lifted him to the pinnacle of power. He constantly moves between multiple fake offices, built to look exactly like the Kremlin to mislead people. No one knows for certain where he is at any given moment. This is no longer caution. It's the paranoid syndrome of an isolated power figure. Every failure in Ukraine makes Putin more fearful. Fear of betrayal, fear of poisoning, fear of being replaced. And that very fear makes him act like someone fighting not just external enemies, but his own shadow. When a regime spreads rumors about coup plots, it's rarely coincidental. It's a trap deliberately set. Russian authorities often spread rumors online, tracking who shares them, who comments, who responds. Every small action is analyzed to identify disloyal elements. This bait-setting tactic was used by Stalin during purges, fabricating fake anti-state conspiracies, then implicating internal figures to eliminate them. When a regime constantly talks about external threats, it's usually a cover for internal fear, fear of losing power. In a dictatorial system, all opposition is criminalized, because the only way to change power is through a coup. Putin's constant talk of treason and betrayal doesn't prove he's strong. On the contrary, it shows he no longer trusts anyone. For 2 decades, Putin maintained power through an implicit agreement with the oligarchs. He keeps the seat, they keep the money. But when war causes the economy to collapse and profits dry up, that relationship also disintegrates. Putin doesn't control everything as people think. He's just the biggest godfather in a massive mafia network. When trust among the smaller godfathers disappears, the entire system will collapse. Putin still sits in the Kremlin, but real power is slipping from his hands day by day. And like all dictatorships in history, when interests no longer exist, a coup isn't an exception. It's an inevitable outcome. Russia has 28 times the territory, 11 times the economic strength, and several times the population of Ukraine. But after more than 700 days, that massive army still cannot subdue Kiev. On the Kupiansk front, where Moscow declared victory, the reality is a tragedy. To capture a town with fewer than 2,000 remaining residents, Russia lost over 27,000 soldiers, equivalent to the city's original population itself. On average, 182 Russian soldiers died per square kilometer, and in downtown Kupiansk, the number reached 810 people per square kilometer. What helps Ukraine hold firm isn't a miracle, but drones, the eyes and arms of the modern battlefield. Gerasimov misuses forces, leading Putin into a dead end. Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the general staff responsible for designing and running the campaign, has become the focal point of all criticism. After the Wagner incident, the Ministry of Defense under his influence chose a familiar formula: recruit people, gather equipment, then push them to the front lines. They call it war of attrition. On the ground, it becomes the Donetsk meat grinder, tens of thousands of lives exchanged for a few ruined villages. Behind the casualty figures is a chain of strategic mistakes, from troop deployment, technology adaptation, to management and reporting culture. Gerasimov still applies classical logic: concentrate large mechanized forces, attack along fixed axes, move columns of tanks and BMPs in long lines on the march. In the era of UAVs, ISR networks, and precision artillery, this type of deployment is systematic suicide. Mechanized columns are tracked by reconnaissance UAVs, opposing artillery lies in wait along the route, FPVs and guided munitions systematically destroy each vehicle before they can reach their target. The result is losses of dozens of vehicles, rapid manpower attrition, a clear manifestation of a tactic repeated without learning. Instead of deploying dispersed forces, multi-layered deception, electronic cover, and anti-ISR protection, Gerasimov prioritizes numbers: more soldiers, more vehicles. That's the difference between quantity and quality of deployment, and that wrong choice has made Russian formations vulnerable to enemy sensor warfare. The current battlefield era is the era of sensor integration, real-time data, and long-range weapons. Gerasimov hasn't restructured doctrine to fit. C2, command and control, lacks flexibility. Coordination mechanisms are fragmented. Electronic warfare and anti-UAV capabilities are weak. Instead of organizational innovation, creating dispersed units, protecting with electronic warfare, Combining light mobile forces with air defense systems, his approach still amplifies the traditional mechanized assault model. The consequence? Ukraine's reconnaissance strike cycle remains effective and is repeated on a large scale. Gerasimov not only fails on the battlefield, but also cannot solve fundamental problems: declining financial resources, bottlenecked defense industrial capacity, insufficient ammunition supply and vehicle repairs. The military, from regular forces to 2022 mobilized troops and volunteers, is eroding in quality. When money runs out and meat runs out, the only solution applied is forced mobilization and social control management measures, stopgap measures that don't create real combat capability. Worse than tactical mistakes is the decision-making system. A culture of fear causes reports to be embellished. Failures are hidden to avoid responsibility. The result is a cycle: failure, optimistic report, orders to increase efforts, bigger failure. Gerasimov is both a product and maintainer of that mechanism. He presents Putin with maps showing victories while on the ground there's no sustainable progress. The battle at Pokrovsk-Dobropilya exposed all weaknesses. Concentrated mechanized columns were annihilated before reaching the front lines. Tanks leading, BMPs following. No dispersion, no cover, left exposed for Ukrainian reconnaissance UAVs and artillery to attack with available data. FPVs attacked exposed targets. The consequence? Over 50 vehicles destroyed in just a few weeks, illustrating rigid tactical attitudes and failure to learn. Instead of eliminating enemy capabilities, Gerasimov's outdated combat model has turned Ukraine into a laboratory for modern warfare. What Russia does wrong, Ukraine exploits, improves, and scales up. Long-range UAVs, interconnected reconnaissance networks, precision artillery, FPVs saturating the battle lines. Every Russian mistake becomes a lesson exploited across the entire front, pushing Moscow into prolonged passivity.